Let's dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unpack a truth that is both profoundly deep and honestly incredibly encouraging. You know, when we think about God, we have this habit of putting his attributes into totally separate boxes. We put his terrifying, blazing holiness over in one box, and then we put the tender, welcoming love of Jesus in another. But the glorious reality we're exploring today is that these aren't competing forces. They are quite literally the exact same thing. The Holy Christ who burns away evil is the very same Christ who welcomes us into his unshakable kingdom.
But, let's be honest for a second here. The phrase consuming fire sounds kind of intimidating, doesn't it? It's definitely not the sort of thing you'd slap on a Hallmark card. Can you imagine opening a cute little envelope from your grandmother and it just says, "Happy birthday, may our God consume everything"? It's completely absurd in everyday life. And that comedic absurdity really hits the nail on the head regarding our natural human fear of divine wrath. We instinctively want to shrink back from a blaze like that.
So, let's take a look at a frightening picture. To understand why this intense imagery is used in the first place, we have to look back at the historical reality of God's presence and why his uncompromising holiness was initially met with trembling and strict boundaries.
In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 24, Moses proclaims a massive truth to Israel. "For Yahweh your God is a devouring fire, a jealous God." And the ancient Israelites, well, they knew exactly what this language meant. They didn't have some casual, tame little campfire encounter with God at Mount Sinai. No way. They encountered his absolute majesty, his pure, unadulterated purity, and his judgment as a devouring fire. And a fire inherently consumes whatever cannot withstand it. This wasn't a divine temper tantrum, it was the sheer, unapproachable weight of infinite holiness.
Which introduces us to a tale of two different mountains. Let's look at how this builds into the absolute greatest redemptive shift in human history, moving from the terrifying boundaries of the Old Covenant right into the glorious access of the New Covenant.
So, on one side, we have Mount Sinai. It's marked by fear, trembling, strict physical boundaries, and thick smoke. You were literally told to stay away lest you die. But on the other side, we have Mount Zion, and this is marked by grace, confident access, a heavenly reality, and most importantly, Jesus as the mediator. Under the new covenant, we aren't standing at the bottom of a trembling mountain shaking in terror. We have been granted immediate, gracious access to the very presence of God.
Which makes this next declaration absolutely breathtaking. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 29 boldly states, "For our God is a consuming fire." Now notice exactly where this appears. This fiery declaration isn't just some random threat to keep your distance. Actually, it's placed at the glorious climax of the chapter right after we are told that we have come to Mount Zion through the speaking blood of Jesus. Look at the grammar here, it's absolutely crucial. Look at the possessive pronoun, our God. It doesn't just say God is a consuming fire like some cold, distant, abstract theological textbook definition. It says, our God. It signifies a deeply intimate relationship. The very God whose holiness burns like an absolute furnace is the exact same Father who has intimately adopted us through grace.
And this brings us to fire with a human face. This is literally the greatest plot twist in human history. The consuming fire didn't just stay up on the mountain. The infinite burning holiness of God came down to dwell among us in human flesh.
In John chapter 14, verse 9, Jesus declares, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." Listen, Jesus is not God's public relations agent sent to earth to soften the image of some unpleasant deity. Not at all. He is the exact, perfect revelation of God's fiery holiness. The fire of God came near to us.
So what does God's consuming fire actually look like when it takes on human flesh? Well, it looks like holiness in action. It looks like Jesus touching lepers and burning away their disease. It looks like welcoming sinners, weeping at Lazarus' tomb, and violently overturning corrupt commerce in the temple. It looks like forgiving enemies and going willingly to the cross. God's consuming fire actively destroys the effects of evil, all while fiercely, relentlessly loving the vulnerable. And that actively leads us to where fire meets sin. This is the ultimate focal point in history, where the consuming fire of God's infinite holiness and his perfect, unending mercy violently and beautifully collide.
This crucial point is beautifully captured in Romans chapter 5, verse 8. But God commends his own love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You see, Jesus didn't just show up to tell us that God hates evil. At the cross, he actually bore the fiery consequence of our rebellion himself. God did not shrug at evil, and he absolutely did not abandon sinners. Think about the logical progression of the gospel here. Step 1, God is infinitely holy. Step 2, Jesus perfectly sheds his blood to satisfy that holiness. And step 3, therefore, we enter the holy place with boldness. Notice what we do not do here. We do not redefine God's holiness just to make ourselves feel safe. We don't try to shrink-wrap his majesty. Instead, we rely completely on Christ, who actually makes us safe before a holy God.
Which totally shifts our perspective, revealing the fire we need. When we finally stop trying to shrink God down to a manageable, bite-sized piece, we realize something incredibly encouraging about our own human nature and God's far superior plan for justice.
Because let's just be honest about our own hypocrisy for a second. Instinctively, human beings want diplomatic immunity for ourselves while actively demanding a divine barbecue for our enemies. Am I right? We want God to furiously judge the people who wrong us with literal fire while totally ignoring our own massive messes and rebellions. But God's justice doesn't work like that. It is perfect, it is impartial, and it is complete.
And that brings us to literally the best news possible. Revelation chapter 21, verse 4 proclaims, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more." God's consuming fire guarantees that sin, death, corruption, and evil will not get the final word. The fire will permanently burn away everything that destroys his creation, leaving behind an unshakable, perfect kingdom for his people.
So the core takeaway here is incredibly simple. Do not make the fire smaller. See Jesus more clearly. The fire we initially feared, that uncompromising holiness of God, is exactly the fire we desperately need to purify our world and secure our unshakable kingdom. It is a deeply encouraging, truly liberating realization. Which leads us to this final, Christ-centered reality. Christ, our consuming fire, has opened the way home. We do not approach the consuming fire as condemned outsiders waiting to be destroyed. No, because of the cross and the empty tomb, we belong to the fire. We can step securely into his grace, safe in his arms forever, crying, "Abba, Father."
Now remember, this explainer was just a summary discussion of a truly magnificent reality. There is so much more depth to explore regarding Christ's holiness and grace. So what are you waiting for? I enthusiastically encourage you to find the link to the fuller discussion in the description below. Go dive in and continue beholding Jesus.